Hi everyone, I'm Shreya Deb. I'm a director investments at Omidyar Network India, and I lead our work on property rights investments in India. So one of the examples that I can give on how technology can be used to increase transparency in the land governance system is from a project that we supported in a state in India called Orissa. The state government had passed a law through which they intended to give land titles to all informal settlement dwellers across the state, close to 200,000 households across the state. And one of the important precursors to that was going to be mapping each of these households. And we supported the government in using drones to map all these slum communities across the state. And the advantage of using drones over any regular mapping techniques is that the drone gave a very high quality image, an overhead view of the community. This was very different from a regular cadastral map, which is very technical, and a regular member of a community will find it very difficult to understand it. So when you print out a drone image and show it to the community, the entire community was able to engage on the map. They were able to identify their own house versus where their neighbor house is, and they were able to agree to the boundaries of the community. So it just made the system much more faster and got to consensus much faster. And in a very short while, in less than a year, the government has been able to hand out at least 60,000 titles to these various households. Another example of where, while technology could perhaps lead to too much transparency, is an experiment that was tried with India's own digital identity system, Aadhaar. They did an experiment in a small district where every land parcel was going to be mapped to the owner's Aadhaar unique identity number. And it was a completely voluntary process. A lot of landowners agreed to share their Aadhaar number. It was interesting to note that the ones who did not want to share their Aadhaar number were some of the largest landowners. And the reason that they were not comfortable sharing it was that it would actually lead to too much transparency. It could lead to questions around disproportionate assets. And as a result, there was, not a whole lot of support in bringing about this level of transparency in the system.
Sure.
So just to share some examples based on our experience of how technology has benefited marginalized communities. The first example that comes to mind is the Forest Rights Act in India. This act was passed in 2005, recognizing that indigenous people have actually been inhabiting the forests in India much before anyone else, and they have a right to the land, and they should get a title to that land. As long as they could prove that they were residing and using that plot of land as of 31st December 2005. Now, this act came into being in 2005, and people had to submit proof of residence. And you can imagine that these households were scrambling all around trying to get proof, some old receipt, an old fine that perhaps the forest department had given them an eviction notice that they had preserved over the years. They were sharing all these various documents to prove their legitimate occupancy of the land. And it was then that an NGO came up with a very smart idea around how technology can be used to prove this occupation. And they went all the way to the High Court to legitimize this proof. And what this was is that, can we look at satellite imagery? So historical satellite imagery dating back to 2005 or earlier, if the satellite image shows that a particular plot of land is not really forest, there is no tree cover or canopy, but it's actually being used for cultivation, or there is a habitation on it, there's a little house that you can see on the image, that proves that people were occupying this plot of land. And the High Court upheld this as an official proof, and allowed people to submit this to prove their claim to that plot of land. So this was a very interesting way in which how technology could really benefit all these indigenous communities. Another example is one of an organization that we have supported in Ghana called Meridia. Ghana has over 80% smallholder cocoa farmers. Most of their land, most of these cocoa farms have never been mapped. And there have been multiple projects through multilateral organizations who have tried to do the mapping, but it's been difficult. And it's taken them decades, and just a few thousand households have got mapped. Meridia used a handheld device, given the advances that we now have in GPS. This handheld device was used to map the boundaries, and people were able to generate maps, which then finally turned into land documentation. And Meridia, within the space of 1 year, was able to complete the mapping for over 2,000 households in Ghana. So this is just another example of how technology can really help some of these marginalized communities.